Your wife is probably no doubt an intuition expert. And she can read your facial cues, even though you may think you might not be divulging anything with the nonverbal language facially. But she will read one eyebrow that's raised a little weird, or a little voice inflection has changed because she can tell that you're upset. You don't have to do much in the way of body language or voice inflection. If it's different than the normal, which she knows what normal is, and you don't have to reveal much information because she can pick it up in the wind. With mind blindness, that ability is severely compromised, where it's hard for me to imagine what another person might be thinking or feeling. To oversimplify, although this captures it well, it's a problem with imagination. She can watch a movie unfold, and let's say it's a romantic movie, and she will be able to predict or imagine the outcome based on limited information. That's why I tell these NT ladies they have to be concrete. He doesn't have the intuition and ability to peel himself out of his skin, crawl into your skin, and look out of your eyeballs and know what you're thinking and why you're thinking that way, and totally understand why you would have a particular opinion or perspective on something. He doesn't have that level of talent like you do, the NT wife.
Literal thinking in people with ASD is a cognitive characteristic that influences their perception, understanding, and communication. Now, unlike neurotypical individuals, people on the autism spectrum often have difficulty grasping abstract concepts and figurative language and tend to interpret information in a concrete and very straightforward manner. One of the defining features of literal thinking in people on the autism spectrum is the tendency to take language at face value, which can lead to challenges in understanding metaphors, sarcasm, and idiomatic expressions. Also, people with ASD level 1 may have trouble discerning non-literal meanings in social situations, which can impact their ability to navigate everyday conversations and comprehend implicit cues. This literal mindedness can contribute to social misunderstandings and difficulties in forming and maintaining relationships. In educational settings, literal thinking may pose obstacles to comprehension of instructional materials that rely on abstract or metaphorical language. Now, it's important to note that literal thinking is not a universal characteristic of all people on the autism spectrum, as the cognitive profiles of people with ASD can vary widely. While literal thinking is more commonly associated with autism, it's not exclusive to this population and can be observed in people without autism as well.
If I have mind blindness, I'm not going to understand other people's opinions and motives and behaviors. And so he would have a hard time understanding why you would have a differing opinion. He would have a hard time understanding what you might be thinking and what your motives are. Alexithymia is simply emotions blindness. And so if I have emotions blindness, I'm going to be out of touch with my feelings. I'm going to be out of touch with my NT wife's feelings. And even when she tells me how she feels, I would have the thought, why would you feel that way? And if you ever say to him, well, I feel this way about such and such, and you, being as intuitive as you are, expect him to know what he's supposed to do based on how you feel? Nope, not gonna work, ladies.
Due to mind blindness, the Asperger's adult does not always understand the motives of others. Unfortunately, when he or she is impacted negatively by another person's words or actions, but doesn't understand why that person would say or do such a thing, the individual tends to fill in the void with a negative. For example, she said that to hurt me, or he did that because he doesn't like me. Because the individual is pretty much in a constant state of misunderstanding others' motives and subsequently filling in the void with a negative, the individual often perceives himself or herself as being on the receiving end of criticism, disrespect, and downright emotional abuse. Now that the individual is wounded and feels like a victim, he or she responds at times with retaliatory techniques and at other times with isolation and avoidance, both of which often elicit a negative response from others. This negative feedback from others serves to provide proof in the individual's mind that others are indeed out to get me. And that is the self-fulfilling prophecy. So for those neurotypical spouses out there that still don't quite fully understand autism spectrum disorder and just view it as this complex, puzzling maze of confusion, you can think of it like this, and this is very much in the ballpark. Don't forget this phrase right here. It's a problem with imagination. Your autistic spouse has great difficulty in imagining what you might be thinking. And then when you explain what you are thinking, he has difficulty understanding why you would think that way. With problems with imagination, he's going to have a hard time imagining what you might be feeling. And when you explain what you're feeling and why, he's still going to have a hard time understanding that. There's this thing called theory of mind. And what that phrase means is we all have the ability, if we're neurotypicals, to predict others' behaviors. Not exactly, but certainly in the ballpark. We can hypothesize about what others' belief systems might be based on what they've said or their past history, what their thoughts might be on certain subjects, what their feelings might be in certain situations, what their behaviors might be if such and such happens. We can somewhat predict these things, especially if you're very intuitive. But with the autistic brain, the business of predicting and imagining is absent. And as a neurotypical spouse, if you've tried to explain your thoughts, feelings, actions, and you got nowhere, is because your explanations didn't remove the problem of imagining. Your pleading, negotiating, trying to reason with did not help with your autistic spouse's lack of imagination skills. If you explain your feelings, he still has to imagine why you would be feeling that way. Same problem. So when you're trying to make sense of this very confusing and somewhat disturbing behavior coming from your autistic spouse, don't forget this video. Never forget this phrase. Lack of imagination. It's not he's insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, doesn't care, you're not important to him. No, he can't imagine what's going on inside of you. He can't peel himself out of his skin, crawl into your skin, look out of your eyeballs and view the world like you do. Or we should say, he can't imagine what it would be like to view the world as you do. But you, as a neurotypical spouse, you have that ability. You can imagine what it might be like to be somebody else. You can imagine what that person might have thought and felt during a difficult situation. Your autistic spouse doesn't have that skill. Now you can continue to hold that against him, and you can continue to try to get him to get it. In this case, it is the skill of predicting and imagining fairly accurately. Good luck with that.
You've tried to communicate with him and get some relationship issues resolved or at least discussed. What's keeping this from happening is his anxiety. He draws a blank. He can't think straight when he's anxious. And quite honestly, people with high-functioning autism are anxious most of the time. It's probably the most serious trait. Well, I'm going to go on record as saying, yes, it is the most serious problem for the individual, because it's like they're dodging paintballs all day. If I have this mind blindness issue and I don't understand how I feel or how you feel or what you might be thinking, I will tend to fill in this unknown with the best guess that I can come up with. And I'm always doing this guesswork of trying to figure out why people are saying and doing what they're saying and doing. But it's worse than that. I will tend to fill in this blank because I'm not sure what their motives are. I will tend to fill that in with a negative spin and assume that they're saying or doing something that's of negative nature. If I go through my day always trying to guess how I'm supposed to behave, what I'm supposed to say, what I'm supposed to do, and I'm always on alert that other people are going to be hurting me at some level, I'm anxious all day long. And that's stressful. That's super stressful. And so I come up with a lot of anxiety reduction techniques that I think will work, which in many cases the anxiety reduction techniques that the individual uses are creating more anxiety in the long run. But anyway, some anxiety reduction techniques would be meltdowns, shutdowns, making you, my wife, the neurotypical wife, making you wrong. I'm right, you're wrong, you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about. And being real rigid with my routines and structure, and spending a lot of time with my special interest, because whatever my special interest is, that calms me down. Then unfortunately, my NT wife feels like she's not important, that I value my video games more than her, and the rest is history.
The individual who feels generally fearful or anxious or confused will typically act out these troubling emotions in rather destructive ways in the form of tantrums, meltdowns, shutdowns, and even aggression at times. And so it's not uncommon for, in this case, the neurotypical wife to view the individual with Asperger's as mean-spirited, malicious, selfish, uncaring, and so on. When your husband with Asperger's syndrome experiences emotional issues, behavioral difficulties, whatever you want to call it, his problems are most often associated with his defensive panic reaction, social incompetence, sensory sensitivities, or an obsessive interest in a particular topic. Because people with Asperger's tend to be cut off from their feelings, they obtain facts and information without understanding how those facts can be applied to real-life situations. Also, due to being detail-oriented, they often miss the overall picture and apply the same level of detail to every situation, whether appropriate or not. And you may have run into a situation where people outside of the home view your Asperger's husband as just a normal person with no apparent behavioral or emotional issues. They may perceive him as having both fewer and less significant deficits than you do. This disparity is often due to the fact that the person with Asperger's or high-functioning autism appears, and there's the key term, he appears to perform as well as neurotypical individuals, with the exception of social competency and with the exception of emotional reciprocity with his significant other. If you are a neurotypical wife in a marriage with a husband with Asperger's syndrome, you probably have discovered that whenever there are issues or conflict, you are the bad guy, and he blames you for the relationship difficulties. And you may have had the thought many times, he is such a selfish, insensitive, uncaring bastard. And what if I were to tell you that that's probably not the case? Rather, the fact that he's not responding the way you would hope is due to one of the traits that he suffers from. We're specifically talking about theory of mind deficits. Theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It involves the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. Not only does the theory of mind involve thinking about thinking, but it also refers to the ability to understand that others' thoughts and beliefs may be different from your own, and to consider the factors that have led to those mental states. Now, why is this called theory of mind? Well, psychologists refer to this as a theory of mind because our beliefs about what might happen or what might be going on in another person's head are just that, theories. They're kind of educated guesses. While we make predictions, we can definitely make predictions, but we have no direct way of knowing exactly what a person might be thinking or what their motivations might be. All we can rely on is our own theories or hypotheses that we develop based on what people say, how they act, what we know about their personalities, and what we can infer about their intentions. So why is this theory of mind stuff so important? Well, the emergence of a theory of mind is really critical during the developmental process. Very young children tend to be more egocentric, as I'm sure the parents in here are aware of, and are often unable to think about the mental states of others. Now, as people age, their theory of mind does emerge and continues to develop. So forging a strong theory of mind plays an important role in our social worlds as we work to understand how people think, to predict their behavior, to engage in social relationships, to solve interpersonal conflicts, and so on. So in order to interact with other people, it's important to be able to understand their mental states and to think about how those mental states might influence their actions. So in other words, you connect your guesstimate about what they're thinking with your guesstimate about how they may act based on their thinking. And this is all stuff that you do at a very unconscious level as a neurotypical. The theory of mind allows people to infer the intentions of others, as well as to think about what's going on in someone else's head, including hopes, fears, beliefs, expectations, and so on. So social interactions, as you know, can be very complex, even for neurotypicals. And misunderstandings can make them even more complex and confusing. By being able to develop accurate ideas of what other people are thinking, or at least fairly accurate ideas, we're better able to respond accordingly. With Asperger's or high-functioning autism, they have emotions, but they turn their emotions way down.
not completely off, just way down. And the reason they do this, it's because they get in the way of making evidence-based decisions. People with Asperger's truly are very logical, in fact, overly logical, and under-emotional. They don't understand their feelings. They don't understand other people's feelings so much. To people with Asperger's, words are not evidence. They're just words. To them, words are just tools to convey a thought or a process. Words are inherently empty until they're filled with truth. So it's not that people with Asperger's have little room for emotions. They just don't see any need for them. In fact, in their way of thinking, emotions just get in the way of completing tasks. Emotions just get in the way of problem solving. In fact, their motto could be remove the emotions and accomplish the task more efficiently. So, quick message to neurotypical spouses out there. You're likely to run into 3 important things with your autistic spouse. 1, the need for sameness. 2, impaired prediction skills. 3, deficit with theory of mind skills. So let's look at each of these in turn. The need for sameness is one of the most uniform traits of ASD. Now, neurotypicals can routinely estimate the probabilities of certain events, for example, other people's likely behavior. But people on the autism spectrum don't have the same computational abilities, we'll call it, when it comes to prediction. Repetitive behaviors and insistence on rigid structure have been shown to soothe anxiety produced by unpredictability, even in people without autism. But people on the autism spectrum try very hard to impose structure on an environment that otherwise seems chaotic. Impaired prediction skills also helps to explain why people with ASD are often hypersensitive to sensory stimuli. Now, most neurotypicals are able to become used to ongoing sensory stimuli, for example, background noises, because they can predict that the noise or other stimulus will probably continue, but autistic individuals have much more trouble adjusting. If we were unable to adjust to stimuli, then the world would become overwhelming very quickly. It's like you can't escape the harshness that's falling on your ears or that you're observing. Also, people with ASD often have a reduced ability to understand another person's thoughts, feelings, and motivations, which is a skill known as theory of mind. This could result from an inability to predict another person's behavior based on past interactions. Individuals on the spectrum have difficulty using this type of context and tend to interpret behavior based only on what is happening in that very moment.
Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.
Hey guys, this is Mark. Click on the join button underneath any of my videos, then click on members only videos, and then click on join. And for $9.99 a month, you'll have access to members only videos, which are excerpts from previous workshops I've conducted for NT partners, ASD partners, and the neurodiverse couple. New videos will be uploaded weekly.